Cool. I know we'll have people trickling in throughout, so I'll keep it high level for the first couple minutes here, then dive into details, and then obviously at the end want to open the floor for Q&A. So for those I've met before, hey guys, my name's Cooper. I've been working in crypto for about 5 years now. I'll start out this talk saying that I am not a developer. I'm actually very non-technical in nature. But throughout my time in Web3, I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of talented folks such as yourself. And so one of the beautiful things about Web3 is the fact that I can come at it from a writing perspective, from a community building perspective, and help to just kind of connect the dots. These days I spend a lot of my time working with creators to help understand new technology. And so what that looks like is finding an artist or a creator who wants to build, let's call it an NFT drop, and connecting them with the developers such as yourself to help bring that to life. And so in this talk today, I really just want to talk about the way that I got into the space and sort of how I got to that point, give a little bit of insight into the things that I'm seeing as the exciting topics around DAOs and NFTs, and then hopefully end this conversation with a few actionable groups to be able to look into and maybe take advantage of if you want to go a little bit further down the rabbit hole. So for me personally, I started getting into crypto about 5 years ago, fresh out of college. I was studying music business, and at the time I didn't really love where that industry was headed. I was being put into a position of being tour marketing intern, really just filling out numbers in a spreadsheet, and I didn't feel like I had a lot of autonomy. And so the initial draw to Web3 was really this entrepreneurial mindset. The fact that I could work on whatever I wanted, I could learn a new industry, I could come at it with very little experience and try and make a name for myself. For those of you that were around in 2017, you probably remember the whole ICO run up. And so my first year or so in crypto was really just getting a lay of the land. It was a lot of trading. It was a lot of speculating. It was hopping in Telegram groups, hopping in Discord servers, and just being present and active in the conversation. But slowly but surely, you started to recognize that the projects that were doing well were those that were actually building beyond sort of their initial crowd sale. And so what this led me to is a bunch of developer conferences around the world. I started going to a bunch of the ETH global events, going to a bunch of conferences in South America, Southeast Asia, in Europe, and really just meeting developers and people that were focused on building for the right reason. And so I'll just start by saying, if anyone has heard of the ETH global conferences before, I think that they're all fantastic. The hackathons that they host there are some of the best in the world. And I've met so many talented people that are all focused on the right reasons. I know that there's a bunch of those conferences coming up the rest of the year too, so I would highly recommend taking a look at that. From there, that was kind of the time when DeFi started coming into the picture. And so for me, coming from a writing background, I started to transition away from speculation and trading to more community building. What this looked like was me doing grants and helping to do writing for different DAOs. So initially I joined a DAO called Metacartel, which was a grant giving DAO focused on consumer applications. I started doing profiling for all the different members in the group. I would show up to conversations such as this. I would take notes. I would do interviews with different members of the DAO and really help to just offer spotlights that are happening. That kind of merged into there being more of this need for placement and connecting the dots amongst different members. And so I started doing matchmaking. I would go to these conferences in places like Osaka and DevCon, and we would host these community building events where we would introduce new members to people that are already in the DAO and just help make people feel welcomed in it. I think one of the scariest parts of a DAO is that when you join it, you don't really know where to go or how to get started. It can be a little bit overwhelming if you hop into a server with 5,000 other people that are all somewhat aligned in the direction of what they're working on, but they don't really have clear guidance on, how to get started, who the people to talk to are, and what to be able to do. And so a lot of the early work that I did with DAOs was say, hey, welcome to this community. Here are some things to keep on your radar. If you're interested in this topic, this is your guy. If you're interested in this topic, this is your guy. And so connecting those dots ended up being a really valuable service for me. At that time, I was basically working full-time in crypto, freelancing, doing a bunch of projects. And so I was going from being a trader to more of a community builder and more of a project manager. And so one thing that really helped me out early on was going from Metacartel to a service guild called Raid Guild. This was a DAO that had a bunch of people that were working full-time in crypto. They were all picking up different freelance gigs and different topics. And so I was able to play a project management role, working with developers to build products and services for teams in Web3. It was projects like Gitcoin, things like Aave, and doing on-chain governance. And a lot of the success I found early on was just doing on-chain governance. Being active on forums and helping people understand what was happening under the hood, writing proposals, helping to bring those to teams and get things on chain. Something as simple as getting a token listed on Aave that feels like a very simple task for that protocol is actually a major challenge under the hood. There's a lot of governance discussion that happens. You have to go through the forum, you have to get governance voting weight, and then you actually have to go ahead and push that on chain. And that whole process is something that requires support every step in the way. And so if you are someone that's new to Web3, I think more so than thinking about building new systems from the ground up, there's a lot of work to be done with supporting existing infrastructure. Across the board, all of these different apps, whether it's DeFi, NFTs, or DAOs, they all have this infrastructure under the hood that's being maintained by a very select few people. And I think they're always looking for support. It's not to say that you can just jump in on day one and be playing like a critical role in that community, but it is to say that if you find a project you're passionate about, you can spend some time looking at the engineers that are pushing changes in that community and step up into a leadership position where they're trusting you to make tangible things happen behind the curtain. And so for me, when I started to go from DeFi to more grant giving DAOs to then social tokens, I started to notice this change from, I really liked DeFi for the fact that people were building products and services. This was the early days of Uniswap, Maker, Compound. And at that point in time, it was like, okay, ICO era is over. People are actually building sustainable protocols and products. I can write about that and have a perspective. With Metacartel, I was able to have more of a human connection and start to allocate grants to teams that were doing hackathons. And then eventually we stepped into more of this social token type realm. And so on the back of something like Gitcoin grants, I was finding all of these new developers and creators who were kind of exploring the intersection of culture and crypto. And so for me, my DAO journey went from being grant giving and DeFi focused to more creator focused. I started a DAO called Friends with Benefits that was meant to be a connection between culture and technology. We created a token gated server where you came in, you hold 75 tokens, then you got access to a chat group that was talking about interesting, exciting ideas. That kind of dovetailed into more of this personal token, social token management, where there were all these creators that were spinning up coins and saying, what does it look like for me to start my own DAO? I think this is kind of parlayed into what we see now with NFTs, where a lot of creators are exploring Web3 with very little knowledge of how it works. They found the ability to mint NFTs. They might be just spinning something up on OpenSea or minting an NFT on Foundation, but that's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. And I think now the area that I see these DAOs being progressive is that they're actually building ecosystems around these activations. Instead of just minting an NFT every now and then just collecting those funds to a hot wallet, we're noticing people spinning up multi-sigs. We're noticing people doing token gated servers. And a lot of the infrastructure that I'm supporting now from a DAO side is really just around connection and information. Being able to tell people where things are happening in a DAO, being able to easily support multi-sigs and on-chain governance. There's a lot of overhead associated with operating a DAO. I think most of the tools in the teams that we're seeing built today are helping to make it a lot easier to join DAOs. And so to give some perspective on that, my journey went from being just a community contributor, doing writing, to then changing to a project manager where I was helping to lead projects and services, to doing a lot more of this on-chain governance and helping to push changes forward with DAOs. I started doing a lot of token launches where I'd work directly with teams. So teams like ENS, SuperAir, Gitcoin, a number of others, we would sit and work with them for 3 to 6 months and really help to get a token out the door. And so on the surface, what you would see is a token getting listed, you would see an airdrop, but under the hood, the stuff that you don't see is setting up a Discord server, setting up a multi-sig, setting up a Discord forum, setting up a discourse forum, having all these different places for a community to come and interact. And I think that whole stack of how to get a DAO up and off the ground is actually the area that needs the most support today. We see a lot of these different areas where you can come and join a DAO very easily, but we take for granted that there are a lot of different tools and tricks underneath that are making that process possible. And so as we look a little bit forward, it's very obvious that NFTs have kind of become the center stage today. I think that's where most people are getting involved in the space. And when we think about DAOs, I think there's a combination of you just being a degenerate. I think that's something that everyone has a little bit of in the back of their heart. Go on OpenSea, buy an NFT and flip it. But I think for most contributors to the space, the real thing to look for is how do you go from being a speculator to someone that's having a core role inside of a community or inside of a DAO? And so the nature of DAOs has drastically shifted from, early days, it was pretty much all like protocol DAOs. Let's call it something like Uniswap or Compound, or grant giving DAOs like Metacartel or Moloch, to now these more like social club dynamics. So things like Friends with Benefits, Seed Club, Forefront, a variety of other developer DAOs, which I'll talk about in a second. This kind of change from there needing to be on-chain governance to more creating just social spaces to have conversation about technology has really been the intersection that I've been sitting in. And so as I think about kind of the next couple of months ahead here, there are hundreds of creators that are looking for developer help. They don't really know where to go. Their North Star and their compass is not very strong because their colleagues around them don't really know where to go. And so a lot of these people are just on Twitter, messing around and kind of trading NFTs. But what you're noticing is there are these select creators that as they get deeper down the rabbit hole, they want to start building out their ecosystem. They want to have a custom landing page where you can mint from a custom smart contract and have that collection listed on OpenSea. And that whole process is a big opportunity to get involved as a developer. If you're able to find an avenue and a relationship with one creator that you're really passionate about, the opportunity to play a critical role in their ecosystem is really, really, amazing right now. Like there are some of the biggest creators in the world that are all exploring Web3 and they don't know where to go. The reality is there's maybe 5 dev shops in the world that are like really working adamantly with creators on a day-to-day basis. And so what I would say to those getting involved, first and foremost, find a project to contribute to. If there's something out there, whether it's an NFT project, a DAO, a social token, a DeFi protocol, and you're really excited about it, get in the trenches, find one way to push something to that community from a development perspective and just have your name on a proposal, have some product that you contributed to very lightly. Don't expect this to be your full-time salary that you're going to be able to live off of for the next 5 years, but you're just building legitimacy and street cred. And I think that opportunity to slowly stack up a bunch of small wins with reputable communities is going to allow you to work for a lot bigger clientele. And so nowadays, when we think about these creator DAOs, there's two folds. One is you just kind of blindly reaching out in the DMs and be like, hey, I'm a developer and I want to help with whatever you're building. But the more likely reality is working with a small group of other developers to help tackle things together. There's a higher likelihood of you landing work in Web3 that then transitions to that full-time position. And so some of the ones that are on my radar that I think are worth checking out, Developer DAO is a fantastic community. They have a bunch of devs that are in there talking about this every single day. It's a very big community. So it's something like 3,000 members at this point, and there's a lot of noise in there. With that being said, it's a great social space to have conversation. If you want to talk about Web3, talk about the nuance that's happening, I highly recommend getting involved there. And if you're looking for more day-to-day work, there's actually a new developer DAO called Indie DAO, which is picking up a lot of freelance gigs. I mentioned Raid Guild earlier on as one of the first places that I found work in Web3. Something like Raid Guild is always having new client relationships. They always have new projects to work on in Web3. And being able to get your feet wet and just dive into doing a small, scrappy project in Web3, I think is the best way for you to start getting familiar with the tools and with the ethos to start building over a longer time horizon. And so Indie DAO is basically a much smaller version of Developer DAO. It's a highly select group of developers that are doing Web3 projects with one another. And they have a cohort application going on right now. So I'd highly recommend checking that out. Outside of the development work itself, we also see things like design DAOs now. There's something called Vector DAO, which is specifically for designers. We're seeing different writing guilds pop up. And I think the thing to keep in mind here is that all of these DAOs will start proliferating around specific skill sets. Right now, like the concept developer DAO is extremely broad. Development as a vertical is huge. There's so many different skills and opportunities within it. But I think today we're so early on that the best thing you can do is just be active in those communities. See who the leading voices are that are kind of pushing forward Web3 development and start getting your hands on deck. My friend Anish has been, kind of coined and championed in Web3 for just shipping different tools. I think Miguel from Showtime is also doing a great job of this. They're just pushing free tools to the community to go and use. If you see a really valuable tool or a really valuable pattern being followed consistently, find a way to just go ahead and push that. Something like an airdrop contract that everyone can use, something like an NFT minting contract that everyone can use. All of these things are definitely worth taking in mind. And I think the more that you can develop a street cred for yourself for being able to consistently ship valuable products and tools within Web3, everyone in the world is going to want to come and work for you. And so for creators today, I see Manifold doing a fantastic job in this space. For those who aren't familiar, Manifold Studios has open sourced a bunch of contracts that allow you to very easily spin up your own custom smart contract for Web3 development. And so if I'm a creator, I can now go and mint from my custom smart contract as opposed to minting from the factory contract for the platform. And I think the thing to keep in mind there is all of these creators are eventually going to have their own ecosystems. They're all going to be minting from their own smart contracts, and they're all going to have their own DAOs. And so today, I think it's still a very bespoke and freelance landscape. But over time, you're going to start noticing that people are going to be developing ecosystems around their brand. And if you can get in the door early and prove that you can ship very light products and very light websites just to help them be a little bit more bespoke, I think that's going to go a very long way in taking you to the next level. And so to kind of round out this conversation, the biggest thing that I would highlight here is working in Web3 can be very scary. There's actually so much opportunity that it's very difficult to know where to start. Don't worry about trying to be involved with the biggest brand in the space. Don't worry about trying to land a full-time position out of the gate. Find a couple small things to pick up and just start playing around with technology. Everyone that's here today, I'm sure is already very far down that path because they're in this boot camp, they're learning about this and they're wanting to get involved. What I would say is that there are job boards out there and every single project in Web3 is in need of developers. And so your job is actually not to go ahead and spray and pray across the board. It's about to find a couple of things that are really exciting to you and building trust within those communities. As a rule of thumb, I think trying to work for ownership early in these communities is fantastic. Being able to find opportunities to earn NFTs, to earn tokens, and to get paid in anything outside of US dollars. There is some really unique upside opportunities to working in Web3 that I think are unparalleled to anything else in the world. And so while it's definitely important to make sure you secure your base, if you can find a project where you're working for tokens, you're working for NFTs, you're working for exposure to the upside of what you're building, there's kind of ways to parlay the work you're doing and have these high wealth creation opportunities. I'm someone that's kind of found success for myself working specifically for tokens. I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see such an amazing wave of creators getting into Web3 that if you can find yourself in this unique position to be building products for them, it's going to be a really, really fantastic job. And so with that in mind, I want to offer some time for questions and answer here. But like I said, to round it out, I am not a developer. I've been lucky to work with a lot of amazing developers, and I'm always looking for new opportunities to connect the dots. So if this is something that excites you and you're looking for additional work with creators in Web3, please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to do what I can.
That was amazing. Thank you. So we'll open it up for questions. If you have a question, feel free to either type it in the chat or just raise your hand and say it out loud. Go ahead, Prada.
Hey Cooper, thank you for chatting with us today and spending your time with us. I follow you on Twitter. I think I'm guessing a lot of us do. And I know you're really big into NFTs. So there's such a huge proliferation of projects right now. When you see new NFT projects, like what do you look for to know that it might be more legitimate than other projects?
I look for projects that are not optimizing for a public sale. Right now we're basically seeing this huge wave of NFTs where the playbook is try and get 10,000 people to mint your project on day one and figure the rest out later. I think that we are very quickly resembling the ICR of 2017, where people are optimizing for capital before they are building community. And so what I look for is who are the projects that are doing slow and steady rollouts? Who are the people that are not optimizing for like a whitelist, like a retweet to get on campaign? All of these sort of like wider growth virality things. Sure, there's some money to be made there, but I think that it creates a very bad precedent for the type of community that you're building. So I kind of look for who are building through the cracks, like who are doing batches of 50 or 100. Who are the projects that are rolling out in very small waves and doing things very intentionally, rather than trying to optimize for one public mint where you raise $10 million in the first 60 seconds, and then you look back a month later and it's basically a ghost town because everyone's just moved on to the next hot thing.
Yeah, very helpful. There's a question in the chat. It says, do you have any tips for writing?
Do as much of it as you can. I think writing is really just about consistency. And I think the goal is to try and be able to say as much as you can in as few words as possible. When I first started writing in college, I was writing on behalf of music blogs, covering artists, events, festivals, whatever it might be. I then transitioned to do a lot of white paper writing in 2017, and then to more journalism for DeFi, and now sort of more wider trend stuff. And so I think for writing in particular, there's two things. One is just showing that you're active in the community. Having an opinion on what's happening on the day-to-day is super important. Doesn't even have to be the right opinion. The fact that you can kind of go and say, hey, these projects are doing cool things, and here's an insight that I think is valuable. The more you can just show that you're in the heat of it, the more respect you're going to get from other people in Web3. I don't think you need to write a lot. And I almost try and think that tweet storms are actually more valuable than writing these days. Like I'll write a bunch of articles, but after I write an article, I'll always just break it down into like a 5 to 10 tweet storm, and that'll actually get a lot more engagement than the article itself. So to kind of like round that out, for writing, do as much of it as you can. Write about something that's really exciting to you. Don't try and do a broad like what are NFTs article. Be like, this is a really small, specific niche within NFTs that I'm super excited about. And the more that you can be seen as an expert in that, I think the more respect you're going to have from your peers.
Yeah, the niche thing is super important. Is a very interesting angle to go about it, because it's much easier to become an expert in a niche rather than trying to write about everything under the sun. Curious, what's your academic background?
My academic background is a bachelor's degree in music business from the University of Colorado. Everything that I've done in Web3 has absolutely nothing to do with my academic background. And I think that should be a strong testament to the fact that you need no prior experience whatsoever to make a name for yourself in Web3.
I definitely agree. Another question in chat, how do you think about governance tokens, specifically the supply amount and how much to allocate to different areas and users and how to distribute them? What are the mental models you use to think about these things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that over time we start to see standards in terms of different supply buckets, but launching a token is very different from sort of refining that supply over time. And so I'm going to share in the chat here. I recently published an article on sort of optimal token distributions. This looks at basically the general trend of all of the tokens that have launched in the last 3 years and kind of reports on like a standard that we see across the board. The one thing that I would say is right now, the unfortunate reality is NFTs are hotter than governance tokens. But I think that governance tokens serve a really vital role in terms of treasury management. And so the one things that NFTs don't really have right now is the opportunity to participate in on-chain votes and govern a pool of capital that sits in a multi-sig. That potential to be able to make decisions and to sort of move capital around through on-chain governance, I think is the biggest thing that most NFTs sort of aren't hitting today. And so to answer that question directly, if I had to drastically oversimplify the way that I think about token distributions, 10 million tokens across the board. Don't know why that's the number, but it's pretty much what the standard everyone has landed on. 30% of that going to the team, 10 to 15% going to an airdrop, and then the rest of that going into a community treasury. And when I say team, I basically mean cap table. So that'll be both team and investors. When I say airdrop, I mean that's something that's going to past users if you've used the protocol before. And when I say treasury, that's basically reserved tokens where everyone who has governance power is able to vote on how they want to allocate that to the rest of the ecosystem.
That's interesting, the 30, 10 to 15 treasury. And I guess like treasury, it's very vague, right?
Yeah, no one knows how to do treasury management properly right now. I think across the board, we see that all of these projects have literally billions of dollars of tokens sitting in their treasury and no clue what to do with them. And so sort of like an insight that's worth sticking on for a second, there's a lot of teams doing really cool stuff around treasury management. You know, a couple that I'll call out right now that are cool communities to keep an eye on. Reverie is doing a lot of work with more DeFi protocols. And so they are actually building tools and chips and tricks to basically do better allocation of treasury funds. So let's call it like grants programs. Let's call it like different mergers, acquisitions, diversification campaigns, you know, working directly with big DeFi teams to help better allocate their funds. And then another one that's worth calling out is called Llama. Llama is basically a team that started out doing treasury servicing for different DAOs and is now building more bespoke tools for treasury management. And so I could name a couple others here that I think are interesting, but across the board, I think just as a topic, treasury management and being able to work directly with teams to help diversify such a big amount of capital. Like there is literally infinite capital in those treasuries. And if you can be a part of a team that's helping to make influence in them, I think that you're going to have a really fun time.
Interesting. I've never heard of Reverie, but I'll check that out. There's a Toby, go ahead. You had raised your hand.
Yeah, just on the topic of writing. So you mentioned, writing and, based on opinions about certain things or events that may occur is a great way to be part of the community. But what if you're like super new to the space? So like, I think you mentioned writing about like, what is NFT? Like, sure, there's tons of articles on that, but a topic like that might be new to you. So would you recommend just writing based on what you're learning? If you're not able to sort of have an opinion yet because you're still learning, you know what I mean? Or would you recommend kind of just waiting till you've absorbed, information to be able to kind of contribute in a more tangible way?
Write for yourself always. I think that writing's the best way for you to synthesize what you're learning. So if you're able to kind of regurgitate the stuff that you've been looking at the past few months and articulate that well, I think that's a sign that you are actually understanding what's happening. I think there's a difference between writing for yourself and writing for an audience. And so as you're publishing that work, I'd be very tactical about how much time allocation you're putting into publishing. If it's meant to be for yourself and you're just sort of writing to kind of get a hang of things, don't worry about doing tweet storms. Don't worry about trying to go over the top and do graphic images. But as you sort of get better about that, you'll find that there are a lot of publications that are always looking for new writers. And so something like PubDAO is a great example where you can kind of come in, pick up topics every now and then start writing about things that are exciting to you. And I think the best thing that I learned early on is when I was writing for DeFi blogs, I was only doing it through different outlets. So I was writing for a blog I started called DeFi Rate. I was doing a lot of publishing in the Defiant and Bankless and DeFi Pulse. And so I kind of had this brand to write underneath. And the fact that they're able to pitch me at the start topics that I could write about and then kind of give me an audience and a way to edit and refine my writing style, that then allowed me to grow into more of an editor position where then I was assigning topics to people and delegating articles. But to start out, it was really just sort of saying, DeFi as a topic is fascinating to me. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'm going to work with a team that's going to help me understand what I should be writing about. And then over time, develop autonomy where I can start knowing this is something worth talking about. I don't have to ask an editor for permission. And I could just be shipping, 3 to 5 articles every single day.
Got it. Thanks.
That's really good advice. And there's a question in the chat that I really like. Is there something analogous to an option pool for future employees, or does that allocation come from the team pool?
Yeah, it's usually always in the team pool. And so usually when you do a token distribution, you see founders having allocation for themselves, you see early employees having allocation for themselves, and then you have an options pool baked into that. And so that team pool can also be just kind of thought of as sort of the cap table. What a lot of equity companies have is they have sort of the team allocation mapped out, they have their investors mapped out, and they have that future reserve for future employees. And so to answer that question directly, yes, there's basically always a future options pool for employees. You won't see it necessarily earmarked on a token supply, but within that like team slice of the pie that you see on every distribution, there's typically always an option pools reserved for people who come and contribute later on.
Yeah, and just a little bit more on, so typically what I've seen is 30 to 50% for teams. And if you're raising, for example, VC capital, what they'll do is first they'll have the equity portion and the token portion. So let's say your equity valuation is 10 million. You create a regular cap table doing that, and then your token is worth 20 million if assuming your team has 50% of it, or if it's 30%, then it's more than that. So there's like, people are starting to come to a conclusion on how to like structure these things, and there's definitely an option pool included. Is there a certain end state you personally envision for creators in Web3?
Yeah, I think that all creators will have their own token representing ownership in their brand. Right now what we see for creators is just them issuing NFTs. It's kind of selling out one-off things here and there. But I think the end state for creators is I can buy a token that represents upside on everything that they do. I'm hopeful that all creators will be routing all of their revenues back into a treasury. That treasury will be governed by a token, and that token is basically a way to bet directly on that creator. Right now we see things like BitCloud and DeSo, Rally, for example, where you have like creator coins, but they're almost like pseudo tokens, where it's like a fan token that you earn, but it doesn't really have a sustainable business underneath it. And I personally think that the end state for these Web3 creators is you have a self-sustaining ecosystem where you have royalties from secondary sale of NFTs. You have these different like on-chain revenue sources. You're distributing social tokens to people who are working for you, and your central hub becomes your DAO treasury. And that sort of being the core focus, instead of having like, royalties from Web2 over here and then like fun little play pot over here. I think that we'll eventually have a creator stock market, and every creator will realize that putting revenue directly into your treasury is more valuable because it influences and impacts the growth potential for your token and the value of that.
Super interesting. I'm going to combine two questions that are very related around best practices for building sustainable communities around NFTs or DAOs.
Start small and always do word of mouth. I think right now we're in a period of time where hype is sort of more favored than anything else, but all of the best communities that I've worked for have all been extremely slow, gradual, and been through trusted connections. There's no need to get 5,000 people into a Discord server overnight. If you can find a space for 3 to 5 of your closest friends to have highly quality conversations, that's extremely valuable. If you start to branch that out to 10 people and then 25 and then 100, that sort of slow proliferation outwards as it makes sense, I think is actually more effective than just kind of putting everyone into one crowded room.
Yeah, I totally agree. What are examples, I guess, of DAOs that have done that effectively?
I think Forefront's done a really good job with this. Forefront's pretty under the radar. They do a newsletter every week talking about creator trends. They don't really overhype themselves, but if you go to one of their conversations, you'll just notice that the number of people attending their sort of talks and town halls is like slowly growing over time. I think Bankless DAO has done a fantastic job of this. They have such a diverse group of contributors in there now, all working on different work streams. I think the ENS community is doing a fantastic job of this. Their governance forum is super, super active. And I think Gitcoin's also doing a great job with their different work streams. And so across the board, all these teams are doing governance, but the way that they're sort of breaking down and categorizing discussions to be focused on more niche specific topics and allowing you to have sort of more educated conversation around really specific ideas is actually, in my opinion, a lot more impactful than just like one giant stream of consciousness where nothing really gets done and it's just kind of a cluster of, nothing. Yeah.
And I have a question in terms of like, I guess just handling communication in a DAO. Like it seems like a Discord is basically a DAO today. Like everything happens in Discord. Do you think that's going to be the case in a couple of years, or do you think Discord is a transitionary tool? Like how do we manage so many people and communicate across so many people?
I think Discord is going to be sort of a transitionary phase. I think that having a central hub to have dedicated conversations is really important. And so the reason why Discord is winning over Telegram is you can have more niche specific topics within one wider umbrella. Telegram's one consistent train of thought. Discord, you have more broken out topics, but I think what we're seeing now is a general trend towards sub DAOs and sub pockets. And so DAOs will start more broad. They'll have like one kind of umbrella that everyone's talking underneath. But as you start to break out and you have these sort of smaller conversations, that's where I think DAOs start to get really valuable. And to your question about what this looks like moving forward, token gated servers are so obviously a product market fit. The fact that you need to hold some amount of tokens or some NFT to access the server, that's going to happen across the board. I think the products will become a little bit more Web3 native, where you're not connecting through a bot that goes off platform. You're just connecting directly to the platform itself. But moving forward from there, like I said earlier in my talk, there's a lot of different DAO management tools coming out. There's a lot of different like DAO productivity tools. So think like Notion or Asana or Figma that lives natively in Web3. I think all these different tools are going to come together, and one day we're going to wake up and you're just going to have an internal work stack of all these different tools, but they're all going to be Web3 native.
Interesting. Yeah, I look forward to that. I'm going to take the last question from Akansha since we're on time. She says, what's your advice for someone who's like super eager to explore DAOs, but kind of overwhelmed by the number of DAOs that are out there, picking the right one?
It's a great question. It's really just a trust your gut type thing. You know, I'd say just trying to give it a shot in a couple of them and see if you're being received well. I think it's more important that you work well with the people in a DAO than it is about finding the right DAO to work for. You know, the right DAOs will sort of self-populate and find themselves. You know, you shouldn't kick yourself if you miss out on contributing to like a really exciting DAO, because there's always a new one around the corner. You know, we're so early on in this space over a 5-year time horizon that the best thing you can do is just learn how to work with people online. You know, like the term DAO is cool because you can get paid in like these new exciting assets, but it's really just an evolution on like freelancing, you know? And so if you find a group or a topic that's exciting to you, don't worry about whether or not it's right or wrong. Just find a way to actually pick up a project and build with the people in there. And if it's a legit DAO, all those people will keep coming back. If it's not a good DAO, all those people will leave, and you'll have kind of knowledge that that's not worth continuing on. But when you leave that DAO, you at least have the experience that you learned along the way. I think that's more important than trying to save your time and energy for the right DAO, which you never actually know is the right DAO until you look back in 6 months and everyone's like, whoa, how'd you do that? And you're like, I don't know, we just kind of did it, you know? So it's really just trust your gut and go with the vibe, and I think you'll find something exciting.
Yeah, I love that. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always amazing to kind of hear your wisdom around DAOs, and you always teach me something new. So hopefully everyone here learned something new as well. And I guess if someone has questions or anything, what's the best place that they can potentially reach you, if that's even a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Best places to reach me are on Twitter and Discord. I'll share both in the chat. I would say that Discord's probably a little bit better than Twitter. The void of Twitter DMs is scary, but Discord I look to check every day. I basically treat it as my email. So I would say, yeah, please shoot me a message on here if you have questions, and I would love to help keep the conversation going and connect some dots.
Awesome. Thank you, Cooper.
Thank you guys for having me.
Have a good night.
Talking to you.
Bye.